Freedom is not free. It is bought at a very high cost, and it cannot be squandered cheaply. Very good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. As always, we've got an expert panel on our program today, and we will be discussing about something that is of paramount importance to each and every citizen, not only living here in Sri Lanka, but across the world. We're living in a time of war. We're living in a time of great strife. And in this time of suppression, our freedom matters more than anything else. And I believe everybody in Sri Lanka, with the things that have been taking place in the country throughout the past few years, would really resonate with this argument. But where does freedom in Sri Lanka stand in the year 2023? As of today, do we really have freedom? In a spectrum of freedom, where does freedom in Sri Lanka stand? To discuss these matters and more, we've got with us today Mr. Rohana Hettiarachchi, the Executive Director of PAFRL. We've also got with us today Professor Nirmal Ranjit from the University of Colombo. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us. We've also got with us Mr. Manjula Gajanayaka, Executive Director of the IRES. A very good evening, sir, and welcome to the program. We've also got with us Attorney at Law Sankitha Gunaratna, Deputy Executive Director of Transparency International Sri Lanka. Thank you very much, Sankitha, for joining us on our program. So let's start off with Mr. Rohana Hettiarachchi, Executive Director of PAFRL. We're living in the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka. By definition, that means Sri Lankans need to have a democratic system. And a fundamental feature of this democratic system is elections. Now, Mr. Hettiarachchi, I'm in a bit of a confusion as to elections in Sri Lanka, because every political party in Sri Lanka seems to be wanting elections. Whenever they come out at a press briefing or even after an event, if a mic is pointed at them, they will say, we are ready for elections, we have the best candidates, and we are 100% sure that we are going to sweep the elections. But nobody seems to be interested in actually having the elections. Why is that? Is it really because the state doesn't have money at all? Your time starts now.
First of all, thank you for inviting us for this important discussions whether we do have a freedom in 2023. But the questions you raise about these elections, whether the political party and the politicians are really want to have elections. For me, when we have discussions with over the past 6-7 months on these elections matters, most of the parties, as you said, they are willing to have elections, except the ruling coalitions, even though they are publicly stating that they are ready for any kind of elections, either parliamentary, presidential, or local elections. But I think the ruling coalitions, they are not ready, they are not happy to have any elections during this period. So we have enough evidence to say that how they react on the local elections from early this year, January, February, once the elections commissions announced the date for elections on March 9th, the whole period, the government intentions or government actions to block the elections. There are many steps they have taken. They brought up new electoral system. They brought up the suddenly delimitations commissions. They were threatened to the elections commissions. So there and also there are some of their colleagues went to the court to block the elections. So they have taken all the steps to block the elections. But your questions whether we have money to have elections, I think for me, in my understanding or in my political reading, the money is not the matter. We have realized how government, how much money government spent for unnecessary things during this period, unnecessary function during this period. This is not the real issue. They are using this financial crisis to postpone the elections as a strategy. Even this now, I think I'm sure that you may raise these questions also about this electoral system change now. Their government is talking about to abolish the presidential system. All these proposals they are bringing up as a strategy or as a tool to postpone the elections. So if I come back to your original topic on this freedom of whether we do have a freedom on 2023, I think we don't have freedom of expressions at the moment. So the main thing is freedom of expressions. The main tool is the elections. So we don't have elections. And again, their government is bringing this ATA and online bill that also challenging the freedom of expressions. Then again, if you look at the freedom for health, now we know how we are suffering with the health issue. Then again, freedom of healthy food. So I mean, we can talk about the freedom, how the government is controlling, or we are losing our freedom on all means of apart from the governance sectors as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rohan Hettiarachchi. Of course, we can get into more detail on these matters come the next round. I now move my attention to Professor Nirmal Ranjit from the University of Colombo. Professor, Sri Lanka has had a bad history, at least when it comes to strife among communities. And if one just takes a slight glance at the history and the reasons that led to this massive communal conflict that claimed the lives of children of Sri Lanka, the future of Sri Lanka, thousands of people lost their lives, not only in the 30-year-long war, but also in the 83 riots and so on and so forth. We've had quite a bloody history for a nation that calls itself a Buddhist country, that values Buddhist principles and that has many other religious communities that, of course, value much of the same principles of peace and love. But all of this, Professor, when we look back at the history of Sri Lanka and where we are right now, freedom has played a very important role. Sri Lankans did not win freedom without any sacrifice. Many Sri Lankans sacrificed their lives, and still we don't have freedom. Now, while we speak about coexistence, while we speak about reconciliation with what has happened during the past 30 years, how is the current situation in the country with the postponement of elections, people losing their freedom to really protest, gather, move, freedom of expression? How does all of this really affect communal harmony in Sri Lanka, of course, because you have been quite vocal about that in your writing and so on and so forth. Your time starts now, Professor.
Well, you know, your question is linked to a number of issues. Yeah, the issue of freedom is a very kind of complicated, the issue. I mean, the freedom for different people, and I mean, it's depending on how you define it. What do you mean by freedom? And so, therefore, it's not easy to give a kind of absolute, the definition that everyone would agree. For example, you just mentioned about the communal, the conflicts, and so the ethnic, communities or ethno-religious communities may define their freedom in such a way that different from the way in which the other community defined. For example, the freedom as defined by Tamil communities may be different from the way in which the Sinhala communities, and so the Sinhalese, Sinhala communities, when it comes to certain issues, may feel that their freedom is being restricted by the interventions of the Tamils, and vice versa. So therefore, when you try to define the freedom in terms of this, the ethnic, ethno-religious, the relations between ethno-religious communities, it's very complicated, right? And but there are other areas where it go beyond these ethno-religious, you know, aspects. For example, you know, the freedom of expression, or you know, the right to vote and all kind of things. So these are considered to be the aspects that every citizen has a right to, you know, enjoy. And so I think, I mean, overall terms, when you look at the modern political history of Sri Lanka, so we have a, I mean, when it comes to, you know, when you compare the many other countries which have a similar kind of historical experiences. For example, in the context of the colonial, you know, domination. I mean, we are in our situation is much better. For example, you know, when it comes to many African countries, and you know, some Asian countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, and so on. So our situation is much better, right? So we are having a very vibrant, you know, the democratic system where, for example, throughout most of the, you know, the post-colonial developments. So that we have a situation where the governments, the incumbent government were defeated at every election, right? Since, for example, from 1952 to 1977, at every single election, the existing government was defeated, right? And even afterwards, you know, after 77, the frequency of the changing governments, you know, the change, right? The UMP stayed in power for 17 years, I mean, and so on. But still, you know, the people could change government through, you know, the elections. But there have been challenges. So that, I mean, that's only one of there have been challenges. For example, in, you know, 1970s, I mean, beginning from 1970 onwards, so there have been challenges. And so I mean, there's a very heavy authoritarian tendency in 1980s, right? And so of course we had this communal rights, which had repercussions on, you know, the impact on on the democratic setup. And these are challenges that we face, right? For example, now as you mentioned, now we are in a situation where the elections are very strategically postponed, right? So unfortunately, we have a situation where.
But Professor, would you define it as strategically or just blatantly?
Yeah, it is. But you know, it's as the Rona also said, it's a very, you know, it's a very deliberate decision from the head of the state, because you know he knows very well that he doesn't have a you know, the political organization or political party which has the voter attraction to an extent that can win an election, right? So the only way out is a kind of tactical political alliance, right? And so I mean, definitely, I think, you know, I mean, unless the external forces force him to do that, he would go for election only if he can forge a kind of tactical alliance which can, you know, bring a kind of, you know, groups together which can attract a sizable voter attraction. Otherwise, I don't think that, you know, he will be, you know. So that's the situation. And then, so you have the other side of the picture. So the last year we experienced the massive, you know, people's uprising in our modern history of political history, and so which create a kind of, you know, the government is extremely unpopular, right? So I think that's the scenario that we have to, you know, ask these questions against. Yeah, and so therefore, I mean, as Rowan mentioned, that I think we can really think about what happened in 1980s, and then we have another round of the growing authoritarianism, where the ruling group is afraid of elections. Right?
And Professor, I don't think the saying that this is a circle of life goes without reason. If we want to learn lessons that could help us, of course, be better in the future, what better place to look than in the past? We will get into those matters more in detail, Professor, in the next round. I now move my attention to Mr. Manjula Gajanayaka, Executive Director of IRES. Mr. Gajanayaka, Sri Lanka has been having several issues with freedom. Actually, it's quite of a it's quite dramatic how the spectrum for freedom in Sri Lanka moves from one end to the other. It was only last year that people had the freedom to come out and protest, voice their strong objection against the government, to a point where one of the most powerful executive presidents in Sri Lanka was forced to resign, step down from his position, something that has never before happened here in Sri Lanka. But now, fast forward just 1 year ahead, we're in a completely different situation. To just narrate to you one of the experiences that I had, there were people who were summoned to the cybercrimes division of the CID simply for the fact of posting a video of some army officials getting down from a bus and raising a question as to what is happening here. Now see, these are the kind of investigations that the CID or the powers that be, let's say, deem worthy of conducting in Sri Lanka. But Mr. Gajanayaka, that's not the main issue now. All of these are done under the current legal framework of Sri Lanka, but the government is now planning on bringing the online safety bill. Safety for whom is a big question, along with the Anti-Terrorism Act. Now, the online security bill has been tabled in Parliament, it's been gazetted. What are your views on this? How would these bills affect the freedom that is enjoyed by the Sri Lankan community?
Yeah, thanks for inviting me actually in this discussion. That what I see that when we are carefully considering the facts that happening around us, that what we can see actually that democratic backsliding is there, not only on cyber space as well as actually that they are applying each and all the spaces, all the corners to this. That is the main issue in this situation. Actually, that what you mentioned earlier, that regarding the uprising, youth uprising. After that, that up to date, our president took oaths 447 days ago. Up to date, actually, after that, how many unresolved cases up to now? If you can, I can give you one prime example, that actually Sandhya Eknaligoda, that she's fighting up to date actually. For today, actually, it is almost 5,000 days that she's finding her husband. Okay. Then when it comes to the current scenarios, actually there are many cases that only thing is that only what we can see actually only silver line is that actually it also under the structural benchmark, that 16 recommendation made by the IMF. Other than that, I can't see that any positive changes that taken place. However, what you mentioned actually, not only cyber, that online safety bill, that earlier they brought forward that the electronic bill also, that broadcasting bill also. Okay, it is just like twin brothers of this bill. Then what I see that first of all, we can see that they are trying to create something, dialogue in the society first of all. After that, they are waiting what are the responses that coming forward. Okay, that is the main thing. After that only they are taking forward it to that.
So they've got the whole legislative process backwards, because it's initially that you You put out a white paper and you discuss with all relevant stakeholders and then put out a proper draft bill. But in this case, they are just putting out a draft bill, seeing how people react, and then deciding whether or not to pass this or proceed with this in Parliament. Is that what you're saying?
There's no any proper consultation at all, actually. But if you can say, when it comes to the online safety bill, actually they have carefully made it. There are 61 pages, 57 legal provisions in that. That means actually they can totally restrict the personal life of any citizen in the country. That is the nature that they have made it. Okay, then not only safety bill, actually, that when it comes to the Parliament, what you mentioned, that after the uprising, in this regards, as a result of the youth uprising, actually they brought forward the 21st Amendment. Actually, my worry is that we expected to, there was a glimmer of hope that actually that not to abolish the executive presidency, at least they will reduce the powers of executive president. Now what you can see, now the thing is actually there's no local government elections, no provincial council elections, all are under the governors, then all the powers concentrated in one person, okay? Then now we have an almighty executive president. That is the thing, that's why we always seen that we are moving to authoritarian country, that autocracy is more powerful stance here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Manjula Gajanayaka. But of course, with the news that are circulating, and I think Mr. Hettiarachchi also pointed out on this, that there are several discussions of strategically abolishing the executive presidency, not for the love of the general public or because the general public really wants a democratic, accountable, transparent governance structure in the country, but just for the simple reason that it is politically expedient for a few. We finally, for the opening statement, we've got Attorney at Law Sankitha Gunaratne, Deputy Executive Director of Transparency International, Sri Lanka. Sankitha, speaking about Sri Lanka's recovery, I think many of our viewers, if not all of them, would agree that corruption is one of the root issues, either intentional or maybe mistakenly, not corruption, but at least mistakes made by public officials that haven't been rectified, who haven't been brought to book because of their political connections. Corruption is one of the main issues that led Sri Lanka into this state of misery that we are in right now. We have recognized it. The IMF has recognized it. I believe TISL, with a group of other civil organizations, including PAFRL and many other civil organizations, conducted a diagnostic report. They have recognized it. And the government, by accepting the report of the IMF and entering into an agreement with the IMF, has also acquiesced to the same. But Sankitha, tell me, government is taking a lot of steps in increasing taxes and trying to tax the general public wherever they can, trying to increase government revenue, increasing bus fares, cost-reflective pricing for the CEB, the water board. What's being done to address transparency and corruption in Sri Lanka right now? Your time starts now.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you for having me here today. So I think we can all acknowledge that Sri Lanka has hit the worst economic crisis since independence. But this crisis is not just an economic crisis. It has been brought about by a governance crisis, a long-lasting governance crisis in the country. So what do we mean when we say governance? We mean checks and balances. We mean the separation of powers. We mean decentralization of powers, not further centralization of power within the executive presidency or even the executive arm of government. We mean the freedom for people to dissent, the freedom for people to protest without fear of reprisals. We mean the freedom of expression. We mean the franchise, the right to vote. So all of this being taken away actually in composite means corruption. Corruption is not just an economic crime. It's not just financial crime. The abuses of process, conflicts of interest, hiding behind opaque structures, disabling the governance infrastructure of the country, capturing state institutions, policies, laws for the interests of the few, to give tax exemptions, tax breaks to colleagues and friends and henchmen, while imposing excessive taxes on you know, the general public who can barely make ends meet already because of a massive economic crisis, all of these are underpinned by corruption. So to your question of what is being done, we have historically seen that the Sri Lankan government, whatever government is in power, is really, really good at introducing legislation, signing on to international conventions, enacting laws, enacting so-called enabling legislation, but not enforcing it. So if you look at the problem of bribery and corruption, we have the Bribery Commission, we have the Attorney General's Department who has the power to prosecute on certain offences. What are we seeing? I mean, it's not news to the general public that many of the high-profile cases have collapsed for one of two reasons, right? So they say that some collapsed due to a technical issue, some collapsed due to a lack of evidence. Now, say the technical issue is valid, there was still space, and derives from a precedent in 2018, a case in 2018, but subsequent to that, there was the Bribery Commission reserved the right and court permitted this institution to refile the cases. But upon requesting that information, TISL is yet to receive confirmation that all of these cases, the entire spate that was withdrawn due to this technical issue, have been refiled. And when you come to the second category of cases that have been withdrawn due to the lack of evidence, that really begs the question of, did you not know before you prosecuted that there was a lack of evidence? When you decide as a prosecutor to prosecute a case, you're basically creating a legitimate expectation among the public that you have enough evidence, you have secured enough evidence to secure a conviction. So when you decide to withdraw such a case, when the authority that decided to prosecute chooses to withdraw such a case, you immediately create suspicion as to what is going wrong in that process, whether there is influence, whether there is capture of law enforcement processes as well. I'll end there and we can get further into it.
Thank you very much, Sankitha Gunaratne, Deputy Executive Director of Transparency International. We now open the floor for questions from our journalist, of course, the Consultant Director, Newsfirst, Niresh Eliathambi. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Shalan. So I'm going to address my first question to Rohana, and it's something from what Professor Nirmal said about ruling parties and why they delay elections. So Rohana, freedom, which is what we're talking about today, freedom and democracy go hand in hand, goes without saying. Basically, the public need to have the freedom to change the party or parties in power, which are ruling. But if a ruling party or a ruling coalition is only willing to go for elections when it feels it can win those elections, then there's really no democracy there, and therefore it's robbing the people of their freedom, isn't it?
Of course, but as Dr. Nirmal mentioned, I mean, compare with the other regional countries in the governance and governance in a sense in the elections, people electing their representative, we are much better with the other countries. That's, I wanted to highlight that part also. But as we all know, even in the past, this is not the first time which the government is taking advantage on deciding the elections date. It has in the past also. I mean, we can remember how during Rajapaksa's period, how they used these staggered elections, or rather early elections. We can remember the local elections. They had 3 different or 4 different time for local elections. So in the and provincial elections also they did the same way. And the other main elections also, the one presidential election, they call early elections. So where the time is permit for them to get a majority vote. So always those who were in the power, they took this advantage. Actually, we didn't have the real freedom at the real time voting. Unfortunately, in this country, even in today's, we had a meeting with the Elections Commission, we raised this issue We don't have a scheduled elections in this country. We don't have election calendar in this country. So whoever in the power, they do have this authority to decide the date. Now, unfortunately, the last 6 years we don't have a provincial elections. The government actually, it's very. I wanted to highlight that part. I'm saying this repeatedly. These provincial elections, we couldn't have it at the right time just because of the present president. When he was in the prime minister in 2017, he brought up the new provincial system, and they couldn't complete the delimitation. They have not passed. Even the same minister who brought up to the parliament the proposals, they didn't vote for that. So this is purely the ruling party, whoever ruled the country in the past and at the moment and present, they take the advantage. They are waiting the best time for them to have elections. So that is why we couldn't have the local elections as we scheduled, because they have already postponed 1 year according to the law. And secondly, now nobody postponed the elections, either the elections commission or the government side. And nobody knows now. The local election is actually on now. Nobody knows what is happening. Nobody can say when you are going to have a local elections. Nobody can say when you are going to have a provincial elections. Now there is no people's representative in this country except the parliament. Parliament also now, when you look at the parliamentary structure now, the people who voted for some parties, the parliamentarians are sitting in the other side now. We don't have a local election representative. We don't have a provincial elections representative. The parliament can dissolve by president at any given time. The president also just a selected representative, not the elected person. So this is the country where we are now, unfortunately. So we have to have a system with the scheduled elections. Even the Asian countries, even if you look at the recent election which we had in Philippines, the 5 elections they had in a single day. And it's Philippines is not a well-established country. It's same like us, but they do have a scheduled elections. So Sri Lanka doesn't have, unfortunately, scheduled elections. So we have to have an election calendar. We have to have that reforms need to take place as soon as possible.
Let me ask Sankita. So this phenomenon of our politicians trying to stay in power for as long as they live, basically, it's peculiar. It's, of course, you see this in despotic authoritarian countries around the world, but it's rarer in democracies. Why is it that our politicians want to stay in office till they die, till they are 85, 90 years old? Why don't they go home, at least, when they're around 70, 75? What is it? Is it corruption that keeps them there?
Well, when you ask me the question, I think the answer is obvious. Because our entire system really is built up to give politicians impunity. So when they have that level of impunity, why would you give it up by giving up your position, your public position, or your position as so-called public representatives? Because we have a system that is completely opaque, even right now. We have a new anti-corruption law that was passed with much contribution from organizations like TISL and other civil society organizations. But still, we are yet to see actual action taking place on corruption. Where we see action take place against those in power is once they lose power, right? So there are 2 angles to that. First, while you're in power, you enjoy impunity. There is no accountability. We hardly ever see a minister or somebody in the executive or even a public official resign because they messed up, because they made a mistake, right? But also you see the abuse of power once somebody finally resigns or cedes power to the next government. You have things like the Political Victimization Commission happening or political witch hunts happening against the previous government. So actually, across different governments, we have seen a continuing trend of abusing state resources, state infrastructure to first stay in power, as Rohana and everyone was referring to, but also beyond that to actually consolidate your power by going after your opponents. So just getting down to specifics, if you look at the problem of conflicts of interest, the problem of asset declarations, of issues like money laundering, we have complete opacity around these issues. We don't have transparency and accountability. We don't have any record of cases actually being filed, being pursued through the courts. Our court system has many delays, and it appears that these are not difficult problems to fix. Whenever you appear in court, you realize that you have 6, 7 lawyers coming to court on a particular day, the case going down for no reason, because the cases are not digitized. We are not using systems in the 21st century to deal with the law's delays. So a criminal case in Sri Lanka takes 10.2 years to be completed, and if you add appeals, that comes to 17 years, as per parliamentary research done in 2018. Yeah. So when we have that kind of system, the criminal justice system barely has an impact on the electoral system, because we can only look at accusations of bribery or corruption or criminal activity. We can not look at convictions. It doesn't have any real world impact. The justice system doesn't, or hardly has, a real world electoral impact. So these are the reasons why, just to get back to your first question, why because you can benefit from staying in power, you would hold on to power as long as possible, because there is no need to cede power, and you have all the negative incentives to stay in power as well.
Just to add one point for your questions, actually more than 50% of the parliamentarians, at least nearly 40 to 50% of parliamentarians, they are served in parliament at least 4 to 6 terms, meaning at least 30-40 years they serve in parliament as a parliamentarians, as a ministers, prime ministers, the different positions. So that is why I think we are suffering in this economic crisis and the governance crisis. The same people, same corrupted people running the country decades now.
And let me ask Manjula, now when a party or parties is in power, they seem to spend much of their time, instead of actually governing the country and taking the economy forward, they seem to spend much of their time in enacting ridiculous laws, which the whole world can see. They are so ridiculous, and everyone condemns them. But they keep on bringing these laws, which we have, I think, 2 or 3 right now. Online safety bill and ATA and so many things. But
some are in pipelines.
Yes, and the ruling parties always seem to keep on bringing more and more, which are aimed at restricting the freedoms of the people, the very people who elected them. Of course, some of our politicians are unelected, but most of them are elected, and they seem to relish in this power to restrict the freedoms of the people.
Yeah, at the end of the day, actually, no doubt that it is a part of kleptocracy, Now, each and everyone are protecting each other, because the thing is actually that you can come to power, but in opposition also, they know that after then, even in cyberspace, in the cyber era, actually, you can't stay in power more than 5 years. That is the truth, okay? Then you have to be in opposition actually after 5 or 6 years, then you can go to to rule the country. Then it is a part of the democracy. Then they know that then you have to protect each other. That's why it's a part of kleptocracy. But end of the day, what I see that now that 1930s, 40s actually under the democracy, one of special feature of democracy actually that there are many, there's a lot of often respect to personal rights. Now, actually, we are moving to respect that the group collective rights, but unfortunately, now governments, that ruling party and other politicians are going back. That's the problem in that in this situation. But that like Sankita correctly mentioned, actually some there are some issues that we can easily resolve. If you can, when it comes to that corruption and other parts also that what you asked, that the ruling party corruption and other things also. Let's say now, you alone actually, that politician alone, they can't do anything actually. They need the support of public service, public servants. Okay, there are 1.6 excessive public service in Sri Lanka.
1.6 million.
Yeah. 1.6 million, almost 1.6 million. It is nearly 1.7 million actually right now. Now, actually, you need the support of public officials. Then, have you seen any that when it comes to the political party manifestos, election manifestos, have you seen any proposal to uphold the public service in Sri Lanka? I have never seen, because I have read many of election manifestos after 1970s. There are many, but they have not mentioned, or they are not coming to uphold. Instead, what they are telling, we are increasing the public service in Sri Lanka, otherwise they will not get enough votes to win the race. Okay, but you have to do only one or two things if you need to if you need to create an independent public service. You remove the 55 provision, number 55 of the current constitution. Under the 55 actually that our constitution clearly mentioned that as far as your support is there, public officials can remain the portfolio. That is the thing. 55 and 51, if you have the support of minister only, you can retain the power, you can retain the ministry, secretary post in the ministry and also executive positions. Then if you can remove that, actually it may be the first steps to depoliticize the public service. In that way, under the procedural democracy, actually we will be able to take some of positive steps, but unfortunately they are not taken, because they know that after few years they will be in power.
Thank you very much. Let me get back to Rohana. Now, Rohana, I took a good look at Chapter 3 of our Constitution, which I haven't done in quite a while, which is the Fundamental Rights chapter. And, when you read that chapter, it does fill one with pride, because it's a very comprehensive set of laws right there, which basically guarantees a lot of freedoms. Unfortunately, I could find very few of these freedoms which are actually in existence today in this country, and they seem to be under threat more and more by these acts being brought by the government. What do you think of our fundamental rights situation now?
Of course, I think one of the main area which we have already talked about, that one of the main freedom is freedom of expressions. So one and main tool for that is the election. So election is postponed, or rather not serious by the government, because there is no such a postponement either government side or either elections commission side. So, but as a result, at the end of the day, the people don't have space to exercise their freedom to select their representative. That is one side. And also now with the new laws, actually in the document wise, the constitutions and most of other the legal framework, we have brought up by the government time to time with a nice document, but the implementation part is the big issue, either good laws or even the bad laws. Sometimes bad laws, they use it for their benefit. Now, for example, now the law which they are trying to brought up on this online bill, safety bill. Now it's very broadly, they have mentioned this hate speech, false informations and state security. So they can interpret it many different ways according to their wish.
And Professor and Mr. Hettiarachchi, let's not forget that even good laws, productive laws that are meant to protect the people, like the ICCPR Act, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, are being used for the complete opposite purpose of what it is intended for. It's intended to give people freedom, but it is used instead to restrict freedom. That part too is quite prevalent.
Exactly the same way which they are going to use this the online safety bill also, because if you look at the whole bill, it's hardly difficult to implement. Because
I think, Mr. Hettiarachchi, I started reading the bill, and I started in the preamble, and I still remember when I was reading the preamble, it said to prevent the circulation of certain statements of fact in Sri Lanka. So the legislation quite intends to prevent the circulation of certain statements of fact. Even if it's fact, you can't quite speak it in the country, which is quite a funny situation. If I may pose this question to Professor Ranjit.
Would you mind?
Yes, definitely.
Finish me, yeah. Because what I'm trying to say is, in this bill, I mean, if you look at it, so it's very difficult to implement even if it is passed, because it will apply for almost
everything,
every citizen, right? There will be thousands complaints coming on single day. What they are trying to do is, they will use this law, as you said, very targeted people. Oppositions people and those who are talking about governance, human rights, they can use this bill, or if they pass it, for only the targeted people. Otherwise, I mean, pretty sure they can't apply this in this way, because it's very difficult. They can't manage even in this presidential commission, which they are going to appoint by the president. It's very difficult to implement, but definitely they wanted to suppress the opposition's opinion in coming future.
Professor Ranjit, now let's talk about how Sri Lanka is moving forward. Now, besides our economic, our socio-political issues that we're facing right now, we have everyday issues that we face. And the tendency is quite to use these everyday issues that we face to bring out legislation that could be used to suppress the people. For example, I believe it was just a few years ago when there was this massive drug issue in Sri Lanka. Drugs has always been a problem in Sri Lanka, we acknowledge it, but it came to a point where police officers were deployed to check the bags of school students. They said, oh my gosh, the drug issue is so big. And then they brought the rehabilitation bill. And then that piece of legislation, the Supreme Court said, look here, these certain provisions that said you can send people who have gone astray into rehabilitation, they're not specific, they can't be passed without a referendum. And then that bill slowly went away. Then we had a time when media should be responsible, and then they bought the Broadcasting Act. That issue too just died down, and it seems as if as soon as the legislation dies off, the issue dies off as well. Now, Professor, since you've been studying history and you have quite a good knowledge in that, isn't this just a simple repetition of the past? Because we had draconian legislation, chief among being acts like the Sinhala Only Act, that led to a 30-year-long war, killed so many people. Are we repeating the same mistakes of the past?
Well, I think I would like to look at, from the point of view of, in historical theory, we say there's a longer durée perspective, it's a long term. Well, so what you have at the center of all these issues is that a fundamental political issue. So that is the conflict between the domain of the people on one hand and a particular group of power elite on the other hand. This conflict has always been there. I mean, from the times immemorial.
From the time of the kings.
Yeah, well, even before that. So you have a group of people in whose hand the power is concentrated, and so they I mean that's always also answer your question about the tendency of politicians to remain in power until they die, right? And so we have the tendency, and also when you are in a position to manipulate the power, right, for your own benefit, so they are not reluctant to do that, right? But then I mean, that's why, in my view, always, the laws are there to be manipulated.
You'll have to turn off
right?
aeroplane mode.
So to be abused and so on, right? And so then you have the other side,
turn off aeroplane mode.
the domain of the people, right? So I mean, what when you, if you look at the voice, that came from the people in the last year, right? So what did they say through various representations, right? And of course there were violence and all kind of things, but they make certain messages across, right? And so there is I mean, they are not happy about the situation, right? So they are not happy about the way in which the power is being used or rather abused, right? And so there is a conflict between the people and the power elite, I would say.
But Professor, if I may just interject there for just 1 minute, Professor, what I really want to know is this history repeating itself? I mean, can we look at history and see where this will all end up? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, Professor, but back in '83, when political parties were banned, when the Indo-Sri Lanka Accord was signed, and people weren't really given an opportunity to express their views, there was an outburst.
Yeah.
There was an outburst at the time. There aren't many records or probably video recordings of it, because video recordings weren't available at the time, but the people rose up against the government, and that too was a bloody suppression of the people. It was way worse than what we saw, of course, last year, probably due to the advent of technology and especially social media, where people who used violence, both from the side of the general public as well as the authorities, were taken to book and the law was enforced. But you see, what happened in '83 was the public uprising, then it's been quelled by the government, and then the government started blaming the people who rose up. And I think even that rhetoric is there to this day. Even today there are people coming in saying, look at what certain people did in '83, what the youth did in '83. We see that repeating again. The Aragalaya happened last year, and just a few days even after that, I mean, we do concede that houses of parliamentarians were burnt down and there was a lot of violence. But now politicians are blaming those who were engaged in the struggle, who are everyday people, who we might even know quite personally, for the dire situation of this country. So my question to you is, Professor, is this a classic example of history repeating itself, and can we look back into our past to see what we will have to face in the near future?
No, I think, I mean, as a matter of, I mean, what you were referring to, not to what happened in '83, I think '87, '89 period.
Okay.
Right. So what happened in '83 is basically, it's a communal right.
Right.
Right. But I think you're referring to what happened in '87. Well, I mean, one may say that there's the history being repeated. What happened last year is a kind of I don't. So there are some differences. For example, in '87, so there was a mass uprising, particularly in response to the Indo-Lanka Accord. I mean, in my view, it's not only a kind of response to the Indo-Lanka Accord, but also it's a manifestation of the general discontent of the people as well, right? So then it was linked to the armed insurrection, organized by the JVP at that time, and which was suppressed brutally, where thousands of the young people were killed. But now actually the situation now is that I don't think that there is a context for that kind of armed insurgencies, right? So the era of armed insurgencies are gone now. You know, even in the north, after the end of the, you know, the LTTE led the Tamil uprising. So I think the era of armed uprising is gone. Now actually, you know, there's an era of popular uprisings. So even in the north, you see, you know, almost every day you hear that, you know, the discontent are being you know, the manifested in the form of, you know, the small protests all over the country. And I think, you know, that is the the silver line, you know, in this, you know, the negative atmosphere. But actually, you know, I mean, that is you have to understand this, the bringing about, you know, all these legal restrictions on the movements of, you know, the people, you know, in this context, you know. Now actually, what we see is that the people do not trust the political culture of the country, you know. They don't trust the democratic process. They don't trust the electoral process, right? They don't trust the, you know, the governing institutions and so on, right? So I think that's the bottom line, right? So there's a kind of, you know, you know, if you observe the voting pattern of the people in the last, you know, number of years, so that the people are voting not to, you know, bring a group of people into power, but to reject, right? So they don't trust anyone, but, you know, they have distrust, you know, a group of people, so they want to get rid of those who they do not trust. So that negative attitude is very much, you know, the order of the day, right?
But then, Professor, what good would it do for the people if, you know, they distrust a certain government, they vote them out of power and bring another group in? But at the next election, at the very next election, they get fed up of the then government that is in power, and to remove them, they bring back the initial government that they threw out in the first place. Why does this happen?
Unfortunately, you know, I mean, in my view, this will go on for a while, you know. Because
when you say for a while, how long, Professor?
Well, you know, what can we do? You know, we cannot import, you know, the people, and the people have to invent their own, you know, they have to produce their own leaders, and they have to produce, you know, that is part of our, you know,
so young people need to step up.
Well, you know, not only young people, but also, right, you know, the mature people, right? That is what is needed, and that's the, what happened in the last year, the importance of the last year's mass uprising is that, so it brought these fundamental issues out, right? And now, you know, everyone knows that, you know, for example, now the old political party led political culture is gone now, right?
But is it, Professor? Is it gone?
No, I think, you know, I mean, yeah, so you have to wait till the next election, you know, I mean, right?
Certain extent, yes.
Right? So
So what we need right now is an election.
Yes, of course, you know, we really need an election
to move forward.
Check,
to move forward.
Not only to move forward, but also to look at the real, you know, feel the pulse of the people, right? And actually, people desperately need election because, you know, it's after April 2023, the political landscape in Sri Lanka is a completely different, you know, we are in a completely different planet, right? So we are not in the same political landscape that we were in, you know, 1.5 years ago, right? And almost every political party knows that the people do not trust political parties anymore, right? I mean, that's happened, you know, in my view, So this decline of political parties began in 1980s. Since then, there's a, when you look at the, closely observe the voting pattern, you know, I mean, the classical era of political parties in Sri Lanka is 1960s and early 70s. So thereafter, you know, there's a decline. You know, the people do not, you know, I mean, when you look at those days, there were card-carrying members of parties, right? Parties had card-carrying members, right? So our parents, so they were, you know, very loyal members of political parties. Do you find any such, you know, the people, you know, nowadays?
It's very difficult to remember or to figure out which politician is in which party nowadays.
Yeah, no, yes, of course, you know, there are, I can name you some political parties, are still trying to find out which side they are, right? So, not, you know, you're talking about politicians, I'm talking about people.
Just to add one point, Professor, I think in the future, the political party has to pay some per diem for their stationary observers in the polling day. In the polling agents in the near future, they may have to pay some per diem.
Already they pay. I mean, even now, you know, even they, you know, they are not officially paid. So they
are given a bath packet
to keep them as political party supporters. So you literally have to, you know, I mean, give all these perks and, you know, right?
Even for the May Day.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there were times in, you know, the 50s and 60s. So there were people who are die-hard members of, you know, you have this Kapuat Kola, Kapuat Nil, Kapuat Ratu kind of mentality, but that is gone now. So that is gone. Now actually we are in a different political planet, right? So where parties are no more in control, the party leaders are no more in control of, so we have different situation. I think, so you need an election, not only to, you know, the elect representative, but to see what is happening, you know, that now, I mean, I think that there are a lot of surveys and research going on about, you know, the voter behavior. I think, you know, we are in a completely, you know, transforming situation, you know, I mean, really, things are moving. I'm not completely pessimistic about, you know, what is happening, because I mean, what we see is always experiments, right? So now actually this is a kind of good testing ground. I mean, because unlike many other countries as we discussed, the Sri Lankan people, even, you know, rural voters, so they passionately involved in democratic process, even in voting, you know, our people, so they consider voting as a kind of ritual. So they love to vote. When you look at our voter turnout, you know, from the very beginning, from 1930s, is extraordinarily high, right, compared to many similar situations, even compared to India, right? Why is this? For various reasons. So there are a lot of other historical reasons, which I can, you know, I mean, I don't have time to discuss it, but, you know, the people love politics. People love engaging in, you know, electoral process. So they love attending election rallies and, you know, right? So these are, and so therefore, they don't like a situation where there are no elections, right? So that's the thing. I mean, there's a discontent, there's a distrust of the political elite, right? So they, I mean, even the last year, the people's uprising, I would not like to reduce into a youth insurgency. You know, what happened in Goldface is not the complete picture. You know, I mean, there are a lot of people. I mean, if you look at what happened in particularly July 9th, the May. So there are a lot of, you know, people coming from even in remote areas. So there were local protests, right? So there is a kind of popular upheaval, right? In the absence of elections, so these are the forms in which people express themselves, right? I think things are happening, right? Things are happening not in the way that we would love to see, in different ways. But even when you look at the social media users, so these are really expanding, and so I think, yeah, I mean that's what so we have to, see the pulse of the people, and the political pulse of the people.
And Professor, you spoke about social media, but all of this is of course subject to people retaining the freedom to express themselves, and well, looking at least the legislation that is to come out, or the government plans to push forward in Parliament, there's a little bit of a question mark as to if Sri Lankan people will continue to enjoy these freedoms. We've come towards the end of the program, Niresh.
Yes.
Would you mind going into the final round, or have you got one more?
Can we? I'd just like to ask Sankita one question. Professor spoke of the pulse of the people and the fact that elections are one way that our people release their pressures, really, by going and voting.
Not only release the pressure, but express themselves.
Express
Not
themselves,
only
yes.
negatively, but also the positively. Yeah.
Yes. Now, Sankita, Transparency International works in many countries around the world. What happens when you suppress that that ability to express yourself? For the people to express themselves by not having elections, and then also by suppressing their freedom of expression online as well.
I think across the world we're seeing uprisings against that kind of situation. If you look at the Arab Spring, all of these examples, Brazil at one point, you'd see autocratic leaders, despotic leaders being chased out eventually. But then again, just like in Sri Lanka, it doesn't take much time for the system to reset, because you're looking at structural issues that enable that kind of politician or leader to come into power. So we need to ensure that when moments of reform happen, that we grab them with both hands and use them for the best possible effect. So if you look at Sri Lanka right now, when you ask the question of what happens, the massive brain drain that's happening in Sri Lanka right now is really, really sad. We are coming to a situation where our education system, our healthcare system, which we have been so proud of for generations and decades across the world, these were services that were lauded across the world, hailed across the world as being top-notch. And now we are coming to a situation where that is crashing. We are looking at most of our public service basically having one foot out of the country. Most of our youth or most of our colleagues looking at options of migrating out of this country. And coming back to the question of freedom and corruption, right? When we talk about corruption, we are bleeding out money from public coffers. That means we're taking away people's opportunity to development, to function, to exercise freedoms, but also to enjoy certain freedoms, enjoy certain basic services that would allow them to, prosper, flourish. I don't mean just economically, but in any sense, to secure a future for their children. So we are in a situation where I think all my colleagues on the panel would agree, and you would agree yourselves, everyone keeps asking us why we're staying in this country. I mean, how sad a situation is it when we have to justify why we have to live in this country? This happens to us every day, and it's a depressing question to be asked on a day-to-day basis from young people, from old people. Why are you staying? Why are you not making sure that your own future is secured? So when you talk about freedom, you're talking about all of that. So what's happening? On one side, there can be uprisings and chasing away of leaders, as has happened in Sri Lanka and elsewhere. But on the other side, we'll see people give up. Professor talked about still having hope, but there are only so many people who have the will to keep fighting. Because even civil society, if you look at all of these repressive laws, all of these moves that are being made, they're not made necessarily to actually legislate. They're also done to fracture civil society, to get people distracted, to ensure that people are busy doing one thing while other very insidious moves come into play. You can distract from elections by bringing an online safety bill. you know, you're constantly fighting another fight, then you don't any longer have the energy to organize and resist and litigate and, you know, do all of these things, because, you know, at some point you run out of that energy, and it gets very, very difficult. Just bringing it back to the topic as well.
So we're in the final few minutes of the program, and I can only allow about 1 minute room of time for your closing statement. So let's quickly start off with the Executive Director of PAFRNL, Rohana Hettiarachchi. So your closing statement, and your time starts now.
Well, I think we have discussed all the issues at the moment. I mean, what we are facing currently in Sri Lanka. I think the leaving the country is the bad options. As civil society leaders, we have to fight for this. The main point which I wanted to highlight or raise, we need to continuously make our demands to the authority in the sense the politicians and the leaders. I mean, if you look back the last year, with the public demand, the president who get elected with 69 millions, he has to resign and run away. That's the public demand. So we need to make our demand continuously on this governance matter, on this corruptions issue, on this elections matters. And also we need a lot of these corruptions and governance issues are coming up, or rather politicians and the government officials playing with that, lacking of the informations. So as much as possible, we need to demand for informations also. That is the other part. If we can brought these most of the informations related to maybe IMF or maybe any government projects or government loan or welfare scheme or whatever, if the informations are publicly available, the politicians can't play with that. So we need to demand for informations, and we need to continuously demand for our governance, our rights. Then only they will look at us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rohana Hettiarachchi, Executive Director of PAFRNL. Mr. Hettiarachchi, you said that we need to demand for transparency, and it is only when transparent processes are put in place that politicians can't, you know, play around and game the system, if you will. I now move on to Sankitha Gunaratne, Deputy Executive Director of TISL, for her closing statement. If you could highlight a bit about the transparency aspect, of course. I know TISL has been fighting the good fight to bring in transparency into Sri Lanka. Your time starts now.
Yes. So to echo what Rohana was just saying, now Manjula said we're really good at creating documents. We now have a civil society governance diagnostic on Sri Lanka's governance, and then subsequently which we have the IMF's governance diagnostic on Sri Lanka. Now both of these documents combined form a fairly robust roadmap for Sri Lanka's reform, structural reform, and for us to dig ourselves out of this corrupt hole that we've dug ourselves into. However, we know that these documents don't necessarily end up being transformed into action. If you look at the IMF's agreement with Sri Lanka, originally it said that there needed to be an anti-corruption act in Sri Lanka, but then when it came to actually enacting the law, there was no consultation done, there was no local expertise invited, and even TISL and other civil society organizations had to wrestle our way into the process to be taken seriously. So it is really important to keep careful watch over all of these governance reform that is taking place even right now. We can't rest back on our laurels and say, you know, there is now a roadmap and trust that it is going to be implemented, because we are looking at a system where representative democracy is really broken. My colleagues already talked about that. So there still is a lot for the citizens to do, to remain watchful, to not give up, and exercise their right to dissent and their right to expression in a positive way that will lead to good reform.
Thank you very much, Sankitha Gunaratne, Deputy Executive Director of Transparency International. We now move to Manjula Gajanayaka, Executive Director of IRES. Your time starts now.
Yeah, actually that the famous US writer William Faulkner once said we must be free, not because we claim freedom, but because we practice it. Then the thing is in Sri Lanka actually that the democracy always we like democracy, but we almost like to respect it, not to practice. That is the thing. Actually, if you are if we think seriously, we can change something into we can start somewhere. If then now actually we talked about elections. If you need genuine and periodic election in future, we have to give the financial and legal autonomy to the election commission. Then we have to start talk. Then that is the thing. Then we need more and more active citizens in this country. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to protect the democracy. That's my stance.
Thank you very much, Manjula Gajanaika, Executive Director of IRES. We finally move our attention to Professor Ranjit from the University of Colombo. Professor, out of the 4 panelists present here today, you seem to be the most optimistic. So what's your message to the people who are frustrated with this
Well,
system?
you have to be optimistic, otherwise, I mean, there's no point in living, right? So what I feel is that we are forced to be optimistic, No, well, what my main argument is that we are living in a massive age of massive political transformation, right? So in the middle of the transitional, I mean the large political transition.
So we are making history now.
Well, in a way, yes, because I mean, in my view, what happened is last year it's a paradigmatic event. So it says that it marks the breakup of our post-colonial political setup. The political setup that came into effect since independence, our party system and basic, the governance structures, and also everything was questioned, right? The people surrounded the major centers of power, right? So that's not a joke, right?
Although politicians try to make it one.
Well, some people call say that
these
are international conspiracies. I mean,
there were people who said that it's all druggies at
can a conspiracy bring the people from home to the street and I mean they literally walk for miles, right? And so it's a real political transformation, right? So the crises are not necessarily bad. The crises also bring about opportunities, right? So now actually, as you correctly mentioned, that I mean, there's a big desire for leaving the country, right? But the desire to live in the country also expressed that our dissatisfaction of the system, and perhaps fortunately everyone cannot leave the country, so they will be forced to, at least some part of the people will forced to stay in the country, and so then you have to right? So this dissatisfaction, discontent has a positive side, right? So you do not like the way you are being forced to live, right? So that's the kind of the beginning of change, right? So there was a time that there was a big urge to leave villages, right? So there was a famous novel called Gamdor in Eliota. So you want to leave villages, right? So likewise, there's a big urge to leave the country, but this dissatisfaction, they create opportunities for transformation. So that is what we are experiencing, right? So I think that's I mean, that's why right?
Thank you very much, Professor Ranjit from the University of Colombo. Thank you very much to all our panelists for joining us on our program today. Thank you very much, Niresh Eliathambi, Consultant Director at Newsfirst, for asking all the right questions. Thank you very much to all our viewers out there for tuning in to Face the Nation, as you always do. We'll see you again, same time, same place. And don't forget that freedom is never given. It must be taken. So let's take our freedom and build a better future for all of us. Thank you and God bless.